Kirby Smart got mind control over Debo.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Georgia Bulldogs football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Denitra Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis and Brian Gephardt. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. And the Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. No surprise about who's on top, but it's a head scratcher as to how they get down bottom. We'll discuss and us or them. We'll talk about that too. But first, let's talk about Kirby Smart feeling some type of way Saturday. Jarvis, Kirby Smart reportedly called out players for going through the motions in practice Saturday. He made the comments to the Georgia football boosters, adding he expected a better performance from his UGA players. So was Kirby really disappointed about practice Saturday, or is that just Kirby being Kirby, finding something to motivate his players with?
And people need to understand that Kirby has mind control over all of these guys because you knew what you were getting yourself into when you report to a Kirby Smart camp. Tate Ratliff said it himself. He's like, this is the hardest thing that you're going to go through. And when you think about what the Bulldogs are trying to do this year, they are ranked the number one in the coaches poll and in the AP poll. We just found out. Well, I know we'll get a little bit more into that a little bit later on. But when you think about the teams that have won that national championship with that preseason ranking, two, Alabama and USC. You know what I'm saying? When you think about trying to accomplish something that not many people have been able to do, you have to have these guys mentally prepared to be able to go through this long season. What you're talking about? What, 17 games potentially? So yeah, that's a football season. That's an NFL season. That is a very long season. So when you think about from that standpoint, I understand why Kirby is laying into these guys and trying to force them to understand, like, hey, man, if you guys want to really do what we're talking about doing, you got to get your ish together.
Yeah. And, Brian, when I think about just what Jarvis said, that wire to wire number one, very difficult to accomplish. Obviously, that's why only two teams have accomplished it. And then you think about the fact that Georgia was going after something else historic, although I feel like they were robbed of the opportunity, but they were going after something else historic, a three-peat, and couldn't quite get there. So it's like, not to say that Kirby is motivated by that. Obviously, he's already talked about not being motivated by loss, but I was thinking as well, this is a program that has a lot of pride. And I think that they still want to undo or rewrite what happened last season. And so there's that underlying motivation without focusing on the loss aspect of it, but just focusing on, we know we're number one and we are looking to do something, maybe become that third team to go wire to wire.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that Kirby's been able to use for motivation this offseason, with them coming up a little bit short this past year. And we're only a couple of weeks away. It's 18 days now from this Clemson game. So I think this is for the whole roster when Jarvis talks about like the mind control thing and the way that he speaks to these players. But I think so much of it is an emphasis to these younger guys, right? Like, okay, you've gone through spring, you've gone through the workouts. Some of you have been praised. Some of you, we've had different conversations about what you're going to contribute, what you're not going to contribute. And as much as people want to think about what Clemson isn't anymore in terms of them falling off a little bit, they're still 13, 14, 15 in these polls, and they're one of the better teams in the country. So if you're not ready and you're not prepared, you can slip up. You can lose this game. This isn't just because you're 2 touchdown favorites, which has been talked about a bunch, doesn't mean you can just waltz into Atlanta and, throw the G on and win this thing, right? Because they're going to be motivated as well. I know there's been a lot of, negative Clemson talk, but they're going to be ready to roll there too. Yeah. And we're here. It's a couple weeks away. So Kirby emphasizing this and telling them, and it's only going to get worse throughout the season for them until they get to late January. This type of rhetoric is only going to ramp up more.
Yeah, and that's a great point. When you're talking about getting your team mentally and physically prepared, right? It's that 2-part effect. And to your point too, JD, Kirby is masterful at that. He's masterful at making sure those guys have the right mindset, and that not only do they have it, they keep it. Because, like you said, 17 games, it's a long, long time to stay focused on the prize. And it's a long time to keep yourself physically fit, but also mentally fit. So, yeah, I think these are the types of things where he's just reminding them, like, you're going to have to be all in every aspect in order for us to get to where we want to be. Now, speaking of being at that higher level and kind of keeping it there, as we know, Kirby Smart is always looking ahead with recruiting. So BG, Douglas High's 4-star corner John Tay Gilbert announced his commitment to Georgia over the weekend. He, of course, ranks as the nation's number 17 corner. What do you think about UGA adding to their secondary for the class of 2025?
Yeah, solid piece to add, and they're slowly starting to put together the secondary for that group. A lot of the big guys up front, offensive and defensive line, they've not wrapped up, but that's been a lot of where their focus has been in that 2025 class, as well as some of the linebacking core there as well. So for him to get, because I think this is only the second or third DB, if I'm not mistaken, in that class. So he really needs to start to beef that up, even though you've got some younger DBs in this group this year, to add another nice in-state recruit, another 4-star kid. Kirby always loves winning the in-state guys, and I know we'll talk about one that he just lost here in a minute, which I'm sure he's didn't sleep well the last couple of days, but Tag Gilbert is nice.
Yeah.
And shout out to Tay Tay. You know, I know that's his nickname. I don't know John Tay, but I know Tay Tay. Somebody's calling him Tay over on the west side of Atlanta. You talking about Douglas High or Doug High for all my people over on the west side of Atlanta? But yeah, this is, in all seriousness though, this is the type of cat that, you know, Kirby gets. I promise you, every time I watch some of these young guys that, you know, Kirby brings in as far as commitments or guys they're really heavy on, they all look the same. They play both sides of the ball, and I think Gilbert has some potential to be a star guy, because Doug, they really start to move him off the edge, and he was not scared to mix it up when he coming down and making open field tackles and blitzing off the edge too, and putting a quarterback on the ground. So you can see the traits that Kirby is looking for. So yeah, I'm not surprised at all that this young man has decided to take his talents down to Athens.
Yeah. And like you guys said, it's so interesting because as you kind of look down the list of his DBs, you're right. They have a profile. Shamari Earl, 6'2", 180. And then you look at John Tay, 6'1", 185. Todd Robbins, a little bit shorter, but 5'11", but still in that 185, 195 category. And you could keep going on and on because Rashad Johnson, Jalen Morgan, like they all have that same profile, kind of that tall, lean, get after it type of profile. So yeah, it looks like Kirby got himself another one. And as you guys said, maybe most importantly of all, another in-state recruit, especially because we got a little bit of surprising news Sunday that Prince Avenue D lineman Christian Garrett decommitted from Georgia after a 2-month pledge to the Dogs. So is Georgia still good with D linemen for the class of 2025?
Yeah, I think they are. I think they're still in good shape. It's just it's interesting on a couple different fronts here because one, it's Georgia losing an in-state recruit. But this is one of those ones that's right down the street. I know most people know Prince Avenue's close, but it is almost like right there. So this is when you talk about losing someone in your backyard. This isn't even going down to Metro Atlanta. This is going down the street in Athens, Georgia. That's right there. So for him to lose out on that one, I think it's just tough, just because of. That's one of the several schools that Kirby's just got, right? You know, it's just like, all right, if we want a player from there, we're going to get him. So for him to decommit is a little interesting. I'm interested to see how this plays out too.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I'm not too concerned because they have several offers in that 2025 class as far as defensive lineman goes. You know, they have Isaiah Gibson that he's committed. I like what he brings to the table. And another guy that, you know, decommitted from USC, you're talking about Justice Terry. Justice Terry is still waiting in the wings, and I feel, and from what I hear, he's warming up to the Bulldogs. So when you have a guy like that, you know, kind of waiting in the wings, kind of weighing his decisions, and Georgia is number one on his list. I understand, you know, the severity of snagging a guy basically in your backyard, you know, from Prince Avenue, you know, decommitting, but I feel like they have a couple guys that, you know, they got a defensive lineman down in Savannah as well that he's number one on Georgia's number one on his list. So I feel like they'll be able to, you know, Kirby's going to make sure that position is taken care of for sure.
Yeah, I would think the same. And like you guys said, I think it's more of it's truly in his backyard, like right there. And that's kind of a disappointment, but we know that he'll reset quickly. And hey, that school up the street that we won't name because this is the dogs party, maybe they might actually get a win for once in their lives over these dogs. We'll keep you guys posted on that part of the story. So no surprise about who's on top, but we're talking about ceiling versus floor. That'll be interesting. We'll go between the hedges to discuss. This episode of our Atlanta football party is brought to you by FanDuel. So obviously we love sports. We talk about it each and every day. And in fact, we were just talking about being a couple of weeks away from the start of college football for the Dogs. So things are ramping up again, but as they ramp up, you might have some extra time on your hands. Check out FanDuel if you do, because it keeps the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all day long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. In fact, here's a little bit of something that's exciting, maybe encouraging for you. The Braves were able to pull off a 1-0 win over the Giants after a duel between Chris Sale and Blake Snell. They got the 1-0 win in extras. Maybe they're coming back to life. We'll see. When you look at the standings for the NL East, obviously they're still behind the Philadelphia Phillies. They're at minus 1,900. The Braves are at plus 1,200, but you never know what might happen going down the stretch. So again, check out FanDuel.com, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So guys, we heard from the coaches. The coaches poll has spoken, or the coaches have spoken during the coaches poll. Now AP has spoken. It released its college football top 25 Monday. No shock, the Georgia was on top, right? But ESPN dropped an article on the rankings, gave a floor, a ceiling, and Clemson as the key game on the Dogs' schedule. The Dogs' ceiling, 12-0, floor, 8-4. But BG, what was interesting to me was that 8-4. We all agree as well. UGA's ceiling truly is 12-0. But how realistic is it to say that the floor is 8-4?
I always look at what happens if your starting quarterback gets hurt, right? Because that's my thought when I think of a floor, because I think that's always like worst case scenario for most teams out there. And there's 5 games on their schedule. So I think the floor, if we're talking about lowest possible point, could be 7-5 if all things go bad. Now, do I think this is going to happen? Absolutely not. But when you look at the schedule, okay, if someone gets hurt, you get a bad break, the other team plays out of their mind, has a great game plan. I think there's 5, potentially losable games on the calendar or on the schedule here for the Dogs. And that's the Clemson game, like you guys mentioned. And as they stated in the ESPN article, as the most important one. It probably is just to get the season started. Okay, are you going to be this dominant force that everyone thinks you are? Number 1 AP, number 1 coaches poll, 2 touchdown favorites against one of the better teams in the country. Right. So from that point, then you got Bama, Texas, Ole Miss, and Tennessee, because I think Tennessee's still a good football team. They got really hyped up a couple years ago. They kind of come back down to earth, but they're right there in that. They're 15, I think. I know at least in one of the polls, if not both of them. So they're right there kind of in that Clemson area. So I think the floor is 7-5, and that's only if Carson Beck winds up getting hurt or injured or whatever might happen to him.
And that's interesting that you say that, because I think also in addition to who they're playing, sometimes it's where they're playing and kind of where it falls on the schedule. And like you said, you're playing Clemson ranked about number 14, 15, depending on which poll you look at, but they're going to be the first out of the gates. And then you kind of get some freebies maybe with Tennessee Tech and Kentucky, but then you got to go to Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama. And then you come back home, get a little breather maybe. Auburn, Mississippi State, guess where you got to go the next time? Austin. So they get some breathers, and I think that's kind of good. But to your point, then after they go to play Florida, they've got to hit Ole Miss, and then they've got to host Tennessee. So, yeah, it's not just a gauntlet because of who they're playing, Jarvis, but I think also a gauntlet of when they play those teams and where those teams are ranked in the pantheon of the top 25.
because you know how hard it is to go out and win on the road, especially in college football, because that makes the difference. That's why we have all these neutral site games, right? So no one be complaining, oh, it's not fair. We got to go to play them 2 years in a row, whatever. So I think that, but I think BG makes a great point as far as worst case scenario. I don't see Georgia losing to Ole Miss. I'm sorry. People can buy that Lane Kiffin stuff. I'm not a believer in Lane Kiffin. I'm sorry. I don't believe he's the type of coach that can live up to the hype. He can be average and keep his job, and for a below average school that are looking to win 7 or 8 games a year. Yeah, he's perfect for that. But you talking about beating the best team in the country, I don't necessarily see that happening. So for me, worst case scenario is probably 3 games. And I was having an interesting conversation with our Locked On ACC host, and we were doing a college football preview, and they were just like, we were talking about, like, if Georgia loses 3 games, do they get into the playoff? And I'm sitting here, I had to think about it for a second, but I was like, you mean tell me Georgia wouldn't be a 12 seed?
Yeah.
They couldn't be a 12 seed. Yeah, and you don't think that, given to whoever they match up against, let's just say it's Texas or Alabama, because more than likely they're probably losing in the SEC championship if they make it, if they lose 3 games. So I feel like that would be a very interesting scenario. Will the college football playoff committee put Georgia in if they lose 3 games? I feel like that'll be very interesting. And I feel like that they almost have to put them in just for chaos purposes.
Yeah, because you look at, if they get those 3 losses too, right? Those 3 teams that beat them are probably the number 1 team, the number 6 team, and the number 8 team in those rankings when you start to look, because it's probably some combination of Texas got you maybe once or twice, and then maybe Bama got you as well, so then you start to, okay, those teams are probably already in, to your point of, it's going to get interesting with those 2-3 loss SEC and Big Ten. I know we're going to dive into that later on too, some of those matchups. But like when you get down to that 10, 11, 12, 13, it's going to be interesting to see. Are we looking at this team with 3 losses or this team with 1 loss? And it's going to be hell of a conversation to figure out who.
I love it. It's going to be it's going to be great. It's going to be fun to watch for sure.
Right. Not to mention that dark cloud that's hanging over the college football playoffs committee of them from last year, because of people feeling like some type of way about them not considering Georgia. And I think the other piece there is, how do you lose to those teams if you do? Are these close games with Texas and Alabama? Are these blowouts? And the recency effect is important as well, because what if you lose kind of, and I want to say early in the season, and when I kind of say early in the season, not that you want to lose to Clemson coming like out of the gates or whatever, but that Alabama game is still just the 4th game. And sometimes, let's be honest, with the college football playoff committee, it's the recency effect for them. So if you're going to lose early and lose close. And I think then it kind of goes in your favor. But speaking of that, the other rationale for this article that was talking about the floor versus the ceiling, it was about the fact that in addition to that key game for Clemson, the reason it's so key, according to this article, Jarvis, is because it'll be a first look at what they're calling a revamped passing game, because the Dogs lost Brock Bowers, Lad McConkey, Marcus Roseme, Jack Saint. But for me, I'm not sure if I feel like it's a key game for that reason, because there's still that guy Carson Beck out there. What are your thoughts?
I'm with you, T. Like when I was reading, I was almost laughing. I was like, do you understand that they have the second leading receiver in Dominic Lovett coming back, who's a guy I said that can break that 1,000-yard mark, that hasn't been broken since Terrence Edwards, right? So those are some of the things that I look at and say, like, I don't quite get it. And you got guys like Arian Smith, who's a 5th-year senior. We know his capabilities, right? He's kind of, popped up from here and there, made some big plays, but he hasn't been consistency from an injury standpoint. So if he stays healthy, that's a guy. Dylan Bell, he was a guy that flexed to run the running back spot last year for you because you had so many injuries and everything like that going on. So you got him coming back. And then you got a guy like Kobe Young, who we saw in the spring, transfer from Miami, come over in the spring and show well. He can be an excellent red zone threat. Then you got the 3 tight ends. You got Urosic. You got Delp. You got Lucky. All Delp was solid when he stepped in for Brock Bowers. I didn't say he replaced Brock Bowers. He was solid when he filled in for Brock Bowers, when he was out. So we saw his capability. So when you start talking about this new offense, my mind immediately goes to new quarterback, new wide receiver core. Everybody went to the league, quarterback, O-line. You got to – we ain't even talking about the O-line, T. You know? Like, what is so new about it? Me understand.
All SEC preseason team. Like, what are we doing here? So, yeah, I thought that
What's so new about it?
Right. What's so new? Like, if you want to give a rationale that that's the key game because it's the first game and because this team overlooking Clemson and what that could mean in the long run, yeah, I can get with that. But BG, I had trouble with the whole rationale of this whole new offense and whether or not they're going to be able to have the productivity of Bowers and McConkey and Jack Saint.
Yeah. It doesn't make much sense to me either, T. I don't get it. Like,
it's Mark Schlabach too. Like,
my
biggest happens. Like, what?
Exactly. My biggest question is probably going to be because there's not a lot of questions about Beck. I mean, sure, can he get there and do it again and mix it up and you have the tight end stuff. My biggest thing is going to be what does the rotation at running back look like in that first week? And depending on what the score is, who's the closer, how do they get mixed in? Are Roderick Robinson and Branson Robinson going to be active? Like those are the type of things that I'm looking at. But when you talk about the game, because I'm not particularly worried about the Clemson game. I do think Georgia puts on a clinic in that game. And while it's not a true home game, I think this winds up being almost 65-70% Georgia fans in there. This group, some of the older players, they've played here. They've been there. This is a home away from home for them. They've gone down to Atlanta. They know what the whole experience is like, and the older guys can help some of the younger guys with that. When you talk about make or break games on the schedule, to me, I think it's the Bama game at the end of September when you go to Tuscaloosa, because there's been so much conversation about Texas. There's been a lot of conversation about Clemson because it's week one naturally. There's been the hype about Ole Miss because that's what happens with Ole Miss, and you wind up doing that. But with Alabama, this is still – Bama got you last year. I know Saban's gone. I know some of these players are gone. I know Caleb Downs is gone, but Jalen Milroe is still one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Kalen DeBoer is a hell of a football coach, especially on the offensive side. So, like, that's going to be one where I think – and there's going to be a lot of buildup and hype going into that. But I think that's the one that goes, okay, are you going to be an undefeated or maybe a one-loss team this year and make a full another run at it? Or are you going to kind of take a step back and maybe have to fight for that 10th, 11th, 12th playoff spot?
Yeah, and also Alabama's going to be fighting to show their identity in that game too, because everybody wants you to know in Tuscaloosa who they are post Nick Saban. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and one more thing, then I will wrap up, but I just wanted to agree with you guys as well in terms of the QB room, because ultimately, just in looking at what happened this past practice, Gunnar Stockton got a lot of good feedback, not just in that past practice, but all across camp. So at least, you have someone in the system who knows the system, who's solid, just in case Carson Beck does go down. And I think that's another thing that's positive for this program. All right, guys. In next up, if it's us versus them, who you think gonna win? Did I do it right, Jarvis? That was my, takeoff. That was my Claiborne takeoff for the show. We'll talk about it in what's next. You're welcome. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by eBay Motors. So think about this. Whenever you have an opportunity to upgrade your ride or die, why not do it? That's the formula for winning championships that keeps your ride or die alive, just like we've been talking about the formula for winning championships for these Georgia Bulldogs. Now, eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. And eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, so our audience may be wondering why I was channeling my inner Quavo and Takeoff. Well, the reason I was doing it is because I thought that this was such a cool article in The Athletic where they juxtaposed the Big Ten versus the SEC and basically treated it like March Madness. So they took 16 games between, of course, what we all know are the two deepest conferences in the country. So we'll go through as many of those matchups as we can. But of course, we got to start with the most intriguing one where they paired number one SEC team Georgia versus number one Big Ten team Ohio State. All right, BG, who wins?
It's got to be Georgia here. And it's really, I think what you go down to is Ohio State's roster honestly might be better than Georgia's this year, just as far as the depth and the talent and everything. But I think it goes when you talk about two teams this quality and this high level, you look at the coaching matchup, right? It's the coach and the quarterback versus the coach and the quarterback. That's kind of the best way, most simple way to break it down. And Ryan Day simply hasn't gotten it done on the level that Kirby Smart has gotten it done. So when push comes to shove, especially on I know that this one they had in Ohio, based on what you sent me. So if it's in Ohio, it might be a little bit different since there'll be a little bit of a home advantage. But if this is on a neutral site, I like Georgia in the matchup based on the coaching experience and Kirby's ability to get it done in big games.
How about you, Jarvis? Who wins?
Oh, I'm going with the Dogs. I mean, it's hard for me to like BG mentioned when you talk about the tiers of the matchups. When you're talking about going from college football, right? Quarterback obviously is super important. Those guys can will you to wins, and then you talk about the matchups and the head coaching, and then the schemes and the different things that they've implemented over the years and what they've been able to do. And when you go back to that playoff game against Ohio State, I like how Kirby looked in that game. I liked how his players looked in that game versus Ryan Day's players. So when you think about from that standpoint, my money is on Kirby Smart because I understand what he's trying to build. I understand where he's going and what he's going to continue to do. Ryan Day, is he going to be around if he keeps losing to Michigan? Probably not. When you think about it from that standpoint and not being able to figure out a way to beat your biggest rival, when we're talking about down here, like, man, Tech ain't gonna never get a win as long as Kirby Smart is the head coach of the Georgia Bulldogs. So I think just from that aspect of it, you're talking about this mythical neutral site game that's going to be played in Cleveland. I think that I feel like I put my money on Kirby and the Dogs to go and get that dub against Ryan Day and Ohio State.
And interestingly enough, Scott Docterman and Seth Emerson actually co-authored this particular article, and Docterman actually gave it to Ohio State. But to your point, it was a little bit about the fact that they put the game in Cleveland. But then this was interesting to me as well. He said Ohio State's defense and running game are the best in the country. So apparently he didn't see that Bagneric watch list. I'm thinking he didn't see that because And I think that ATN and the rest of that running back core would have something to say about you calling that core the best in the country. Emerson, on the other hand, he knows he called the continuity, which is exactly what we talked about in the last segment, that author, in that article was questioning the continuity, but Seth Emerson, who covers them on a daily basis and has covered them for years, knows about the continuity of this team. Now let's try to get maybe one more in as far as that March Madness type matchup of the number two. So they have SEC number 2 Texas, Big Ten number 2 Oregon. Now here they have the location as Vegas, but again, we're just going to put it for our intents and purposes neutral site. So if we put it neutral site, Jarvis, who wins?
Wow, you're talking about Oregon and wow.
That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a tough one. Ooh, wow.
They're like the same type of team, for lack of a better term. Texas and Oregon, I don't know. They just feel like the same team to me.
Yeah. I mean, you think about the quarterback, you talk about Dylan Gabriel and Quinn Ewers. So, I guess that's a wash for me.
Yeah.
But, I feel like Dan Lanning will probably pull this bad boy out because, he brings that. We understand what he likes to do on defense and that mindset, right? And for me, I just don't trust Sark in big games. I just don't. I don't trust Sark in big games. So I feel like, of course he made some strides, last year and getting into the playoffs and everything like that. But for me, it just doesn't feel like Steve Sarkisian is quite ready. I feel like he needs to do a full season of, hey, we're here and we're here to stay, and that's going to be hard as HE double hockey sticks to do in your first year in the SEC. So yeah, I'm going with Oregon and Dan Lanning, and they're going to get the win for sure.
Yeah, we had a conversation a couple months back about, all right, now that Saban and Harbaugh are gone, it's clearly Kirby's the number one coach in the country. Who's the number two? And it was really pretty much open-ended on who it was. And I think a general consensus for us, or I know at least my opinion was, I think Dan Lanning emerges as that guy, as the number two person. And it's kind of Dan Lanning, Sark, maybe some Ryan Day, maybe some Lincoln Riley, if you want to toss him, Brian Kelly, sort of. But I think it's Dan Lanning ultimately who comes out of this as the other coach, the other guy who's constantly there year in and year out. So to your point, I don't trust Sark as much in those big games versus Lanning. And Lanning doesn't have the vast experience that some of these other head coaches have. Now, he's done well so far, and he's played in some big ones, but he's got to win some himself. But I think bringing in Dylan Gabriel and having that as their setup, I think they're in for a hell of a run. I think they ultimately wind up winning the Big Ten this year too, Oregon.
Yeah. And those, let's see, it's Doctorman and Emerson. They both went with Oregon as well. Now let's get one more in. Number 3, Alabama for the SEC. Big Ten number 3, Penn State. Now we're switching the location again because they put it in Pasadena, California, but we're going neutral site. So if we go neutral site with Bama and Penn State, who wins it, BG?
I'm going to go with Bama here, and it's simply because I can't remember the last time Penn State scored enough points in a big game that really mattered. So I'm going to go with the team that's got the quarterback who I know they can put up 20 plus, even if it's again, like it's going to be a race to 20 in that game. I would assume like right around that number. And I don't know if Penn State can get past 13. So I'm going to go with Bama in that spot and that offense. And I just I'm really interested to see how Jalen Milroe does this year. I think he's going to have an awesome year and be a really high draft pick. And be in the conversation potentially even for the number 1 overall pick. I just think he's going to be awesome this season. So I'm going to go with Bama in that matchup.
I'm going with Bama too because, James Franklin, hey, man, you're doing a solid job, a really good job up there with Penn State. But just when you can't beat your rivals, I'm sorry, I can't go with you. So, I'm going to go with
little Lane Kiffin
Alabama because I feel like there's a lot of talent still there left over from when Nick Saban was there. Like BG mentioned, Kellen DeBoer is a heck of a coach. He got Michael Penix Jr. into the NFL as far as from a coaching up standpoint and knowing how to maximize his potential. He put it on display. So, and I feel like he's going to do the same for Jalen Milroe. So I'm looking forward to Jalen Milroe's development, and I feel like in this matchup against that team, I feel like Bama will be able to take full advantage of it for sure.
Well, you talked about being able to take advantage and overcoming your rivals. Some dogs did the same thing. So we just wanted to real quick congratulate all former dogs who won medals in the Olympic Games, including Anthony Edwards, who of course competed at UGA for a season, won gold with the U.S. men's basketball team, otherwise known as the Avengers. Tara Davis Woodhall, who competed one season at UGA, won gold in the long jump, and Corey Bethune, who's a former All-American and won gold with the U.S. women's soccer team. Congrats to all the dogs who won at the Olympics. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Bulldogs for your second listen. And be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We'll see you on the Atlanta Sports Party Thursday.